Okay, so the very short synopsis that I'll give is that alienation is sort of this kind of crucial part of Marx's explanation of how capitalism dehumanizes workers, us, and distorts the social relations between us, like even outside of the context of work. So alienation is kind of the state of condition of being separated from something that's like fundamental to being human, to being who we are. So I'm going to look at the kind of four different aspects of alienation or ways that it manifests. And when I was like reading, so this is all kind of based on some passages from the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, some young Marx. And when I was reading, I was struck by like how familiar a lot of the stuff sounded, and you probably will be too. So to start off, kind of before getting into the four aspects, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about how labor becomes a commodity. And so to start with, I'll just talk about unalienated labor. So just work, like what we might think of when we think of just doing some work. So work, it's like it's a fundamental part of our experience as social human beings. Like it's how we meet our own needs. It's how we contribute to meeting the needs of our neighbors and society. And so here, I mean, work in a really general way, just any effort we need to expend. And it's a big way that we express our humanity. It's our way that our creativity comes out a lot of the time, and it's a way that we connect with other people. Right? We all know this. And sort of in this context, I'm going to be focusing a lot on kind of productive work. But that's still really broad. So that could be producing objects and goods, but I think also like activities or what they might call now like services. These all have like value due to satisfying some kind of human need or some desire. That's a type of value that we produce by doing work. And so there's you've surely done examples of this today. So you could be making food, you could be producing tools, you could be building housing, you could be teaching people, raising children, looking after your personal relationships. That's an important part of kind of work that sometimes doesn't get identified, but that's work. Making art, like this is all work in just like the sort of pure human sense. But when capitalism enters the picture, then labor becomes a commodity, and that's the key to alienation. So things become commodities when they are exchanged in a market. And then the value that we talk about when we talk about economic value is no longer about the use that we get out of the commodity. It's about how much you can exchange for something else in a market. And we can think about where that comes from, but what it really boils down to is that all those things we're exchanging in the market had to be produced. And if you just as a matter of kind of observable fact, things that didn't take very much to produce are cheap on the market, and things that took a lot of work to produce are not so cheap. And that's because the value of the thing comes from the labor that went into producing it. And this is kind of the key, probably quite familiar to many of you notion. And but the thing is that when you go to work, right, you're selling your labor to your boss, to a capitalist, someone who owns the means of production. And so as soon as that happens, your labor has become a commodity, like the things that you're going to make. And it's this process, like the labor getting made into a commodity. So it used to be like some just fundamental part of being human. Now it became a commodity like anything else. And this is the sort of the source of the alienation. So now we can go into like just run through the kind of ways that it plays out. So the first type of alienation that Marx identifies in that writing was alienation from the product of one's labor. And so I've put the little quote here that for me kind of sums it up. Like, I mean, I made up this quote because I don't make shoes, but you can imagine, and it's a real situation in the world, someone who's employed making shoes, but is not paid a high enough wage to be able to afford the same shoes that they're making. So that's an example of that's like a very good example of alienation from the product of your labor. So what happens here is you're producing a commodity and you don't own it, right? Your boss has paid you some wages in exchange for the time and work that you put into it. And then the boss goes and sells sells the product you made. And there's this wouldn't be happening unless the boss was getting some advantage out of this, right? So there's a difference between the value that you created. The value you created is bigger than what you're getting from your boss in the form of wages, and that difference is that's exploitation. And the really sort of like I find this like more and more bizarre the more you think about it, but like the more effectively you do work, the more productive you are for your boss, the more is being taken from you in labor for about the same amount that you're getting back, because you're just getting back a wage. As you become more productive, maybe you get better tools, better machines, you're really getting poorer in a real sense. The difference between what's taken from you and what you are paid is getting bigger and bigger. So that process takes this very human thing, your potential to do work, and it sort of turns it against you. So Marx has this like quote, this kind of evocative quote, which like, yeah, I've got a little vampire over here because your own human capacities are being turned against you when your labor is commodified. And he talks about the product itself that you produce confronting you as something hostile and alien. So that's the first way. The second part, and maybe I'll speed up a little bit. The second part is alienation from the process or the activity of production. And this is another one that like maybe we've all felt where you were, maybe we're fortunate and there's aspects of our work, like our paid work, that we enjoy or we find meaningful. That's true for me. I teach, and which is I find inherently meaningful, except not always, right? Because it's also work. You got to do it no matter what mood you're in or what else is going on in your life. You got to go to work, and it's common experience that we kind of feel uh, that we enjoyed it until it became required, kind of. So since this is like reflecting that the work is coerced, we have to do it in order to survive. And this leads to like a little paradox, right? Because we wouldn't be doing our paid work often unless we needed to in order to pay our rent and our bills and whatever. But so in that sense, it's very purposeful, but we don't have any control, or we often have little control over how we do it, or we might only be involved in a tiny piece of the process, and we don't really see the effect of our actions. So it seems like something sometimes very pointless that we're doing, but it's like if you don't do it, you'll starve, right? So it's this very strange paradox that kind of gets between you and the activity itself. The third thing is alienation from people, and the most obvious way that this plays out that I'm sure, like I hope no one here. I mean, I'm sure we have experienced it. I hope no one's experienced it too badly, I guess, is the conflict between you and and the owner of the capitalist who you're selling your labor to, your boss. Um, right, that's a fundamental antagonism. But that just is the beginning, because there's a lot of other you know antagonisms that are created the by the process of commodifying labor. Specifically disconnection between you and the other workers, um, which happens in lots of ways. You can work with you know people on part of a large team, and you don't have much connection to anything else that anyone else is doing, and so you don't really have too much in common, or you both kind of don't really feel like what you're doing is very important or impactful or something because of the previous type of alienation. You're alienated from the process, so you can't really feel like the two of you have some deep common goal because you don't really care about the thing, right? Like, so there's lots of factors like that can sort of separate you from your fellow workers. And so instead of solidarity, there's kind of indifference or apathy, and then competition because the the boss is there's always the implicit threat that somebody else could be doing your job instead of you, and this kind of creates competition and suspicion, and this filters out through all of society. So I think this is where the alienation from people is where this really stops being just about the workplace and starts affecting like all of our interactions with other people. If we're used to seeing ourselves as a commodity because our labor is commodified, we start to see other people as commodities too. And this really, I think that's a quite fundamental point. I want to draw attention to this picture here. It's like this is from just after the disaster in Bangladesh, like a disaster, a crime, a matter of terrible negligence by the owner of a clothing factory, which collapsed and killed more than 1,000 people in 2013, I think. And so there were massive strikes and protests after this incident. And so this worker here has got a sign that says, "I don't want to die for fashion," which kind of really nails down. I think that kind of really nails down the alienation from people aspect of this. Um, yeah, and the last aspect of alienation that is identified in that essay is alienation from our own humanity. So this is where Marx uses this like word that I find a bit abstract, and I can't say I really totally understand what he means. So he doesn't say humanity; he says our species being. Um, but the point comes across saying like alienation from the things that make us human. So we are active when we need to be, and when we can, anytime you make a plan or anything, you're imagining your own kind of capacity to change your surroundings and participate. And that means work is one of the ways that we can be very creative, and we can be very powerful, and we can develop our relationships with other people. And it's in principle, a very human, affirming thing. But because of all those, forms of alienation that happen when our work is commodified, uh, like often that kind of positive potential in work is like totally lost and I chose this picture because it illustrates the role of technology, because I want to imagine that the workers in this picture, I think this is another textile industry picture from a different time and place, but they may well have to do their own like textile work at home in a more artisanal way. They may well make or fix their own clothing or something. So there are probably people like with a lot of skills, but their paid work is like taking um, is not relying on those skills. Instead, it's making them basically into part of the machines that they're operating. And there's a really um, specific economic reason, like for how like explanation for the role of technology. And I like it's something people are thinking a lot about, like with AI. right? The play is not that the machine is going to replace you. It's that the machine is going to change your job to make it more repetitive and more narrow so that more people could potentially do it. And so you have to compete with more people for that job, and it pushes wages down. So this is like de-skilling, and that's the one I wanted to end on, because like that's a thing I think is a source of like a lot of direct fear in the current like technological climate, is like that is the de-skilling of jobs, which is a huge part of the alienation, and it's also like this kind of looming threat. And so yeah, so on that kind of grim note, that's the beginning of the introduction done. Um, Here's the slide with all of the uh, like some background stuff that I mentioned earlier, including James Reed's classic speech, which Helen had brought up a few weeks ago, which created the idea to have this session. It's a really good one. You can go read it. But I think I'll turn over to Sean, and if anyone wants, I can send you these links afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. So yeah, Mark's I think very well kind of laid the foundation of what alienation is, and I'm going to go into a bit about its history, how we got to this point, and especially talk about how it's expressed through culture, art, and religion. For hundreds of thousands of years, culture was the property of the whole community, not a privileged elite. Our spirituality was also a social collective act, and this integral part of our human nature was reflected in our art and customs. We painted and venerated what was important to us, what we desired and revered in our struggle for survival. So here's an example from 35,500-year-old cave art from Spain. The dense nutrition from bison and other game was evidently of great significance to our ancestors. There's great speculation and debate about why we created such art and why in such inaccessible and inconvenient places that could often only be viewed with a torch. Given the immensely rich spirituality of our ancestors, it seems likely that caves were seen as some kind of portal to a spiritual world, and painting these animals would somehow make them more abundant or easier to catch, perhaps like making a wish when throwing a penny in a well. Something similar was done locally in Bath in 200 AD, when inscribed tablets asking for specific divine intervention were thrown into the sacred temple waters of Sulis. So here's some more cave art from roughly 20,000 years ago in France. What you'll notice from prehistoric art is that there are no depictions of any kings, slaves, or privileged hierarchy. This is because such developments had yet to take place in society. We lived communistically. At this stage, we were animists and understood the world as being full of spirits which made the rivers flow, mountains grow, and plants produce fruit. This is what we revered and worshipped, not human-like gods. This is because we didn't view ourselves as separate to or supreme over nature or each other yet. So when did alienation begin and why? One of the original forms of alienation was through mysticism. In order to make sense of colossal natural phenomena such as lightning, thunder, and rain, we invented spirits responsible for such forces. Although this was disempowering in a sense, giving away our time and energy to spirits and sacrificing for them, it was also based on our communal decisions and desires. Our spirituality and culture was ours. We were able to adapt it for the benefit of the whole community. It was the soul of our soulless conditions and gave us a sense of purpose and place in the universe. It helped us survive. In stark contrast, this Egyptian relief from 1300 BC depicts prisoners of war being enslaved. This is a striking example of how the emergence of class society created completely new, brutal forms of alienation and exploitation. This alienating transformation was the result of the Neolithic Revolution, which began roughly 8,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. A shift away from nomadic hunter-gatherers towards settled farmers produced a newfound abundance, but also created the basis for class society to form. Over many centuries and millennia, the surplus produced from this agricultural transformation became increasingly concentrated in the hands of a privileged elite, typically under the control of the priest caste. This gave rise to fundamental shifts in spirituality and cultural norms. This is the root of the distinct class-based alienation we suffer today. Under this new settled farming way of life, we had for the first time the division between mental and manual labour, between the planners and the workers, the priest and the flock. The alienation from the product of our labour was accompanied by spiritual and artistic dispossession. The elite's monopoly over production grew to also include culture. Religion, art, and all other aspects of intellectual life ceased to be the common property of all, but instead became the private mysteries of a minority who took upon itself the God-given right to interpret these mysteries for the good of the people. Art and religion became a tool of state oppression, whereby only the priests could communicate with the rain or sun gods, and therefore the ruling elite's privilege must be protected and expanded. As class society developed, spirituality became increasingly centered on obedience and worship of personified gods in human form. The new masters over production in society gradually became the gods of society. So this is a relief from ancient Sumeria, and here you can see the king acting as an intermediary between the celestial forces and the mortal world. So yeah, this is also from Sumeria, and here is the royal entourage of the king carrying the king's throne. The rise of this privileged priest caste expressed itself in the creation of huge temples and monuments. The enormous ancient structures in Egypt, for example, deliver a very clear message, the message of power, of dominance, of elitism. So here are the ruins of a sun temple in Egypt dating to 2500 BC. The temple was dedicated to Ra, with the king presenting himself as the only son of Ra on earth and legitimizing his power through the temple. The Egyptian masses were captured by such elaborate, compelling narratives and achievements. This dominance and storytelling was enhanced by being displayed in astonishing new colors and detail, using specialist skills and knowledge only known to a chosen few. The means for codifying an official state narrative were born. You could say that the inscriptions and art of the pyramids were the original BBC. Everything had its place in ancient Egypt, and every act by authority regarding culture aimed to further cement the class divisions and protect the elite's privilege for all eternity. So this is an image from the same Ra temple of the sacrificial altars there. Yeah, and all these wondrous achievements of ancient Egypt were fundamentally built from the sacrifices of the exploited labor of the majority. The freedom of the few relied on the lack of freedom for the many. So this is a wall from the tomb of Nakht, an ancient Egyptian official and scribe from roughly 1400 BC. Only people with roles vital to the ruling class would receive such lavish burials. The class divide in society is easily observable through the depictions on the wall of this scribe's tomb. The workers are small and barely clothed, whereas the upper classes are comparatively large and wear elaborate clothes and accessories, standing or sitting over the workers, instructing them with the guidance they receive from the gods, living a life of luxury whilst the majority toil. As art became more sophisticated, so it became more elite. The knowledge, materials, and tools necessary could only be acquired and utilized by a tiny section of society, such as rare metal and crystal paints, parchment, and knowledge of art itself. A decisive moment for the division between mental and physical labor was the invention of writing in roughly 3500 BC. The secret of writing was jealously guarded by the priest scribes and later royal scribes, such as was the case with Latin until fairly recently. The difference of attitude towards mental and physical labor by the ruling class is strikingly expressed in the following quote. So this is a quote and advice from a high-up Egyptian to his son in 2000 BC. Since I have seen those who have been beaten, it is to writings that you must set your mind. See for yourself, it saves one from work. Behold, there is nothing that surpasses writings. I have seen a coppersmith at his work at the mouth of his furnace. His fingers were like the claws of the crocodile, and he stank more than fish eggs. The potter is covered with earth. He burrows in the field more than swine to bake his cooking vessels, his clothes being stiff with mud. See, there is no office free from supervisors except the scribes. Generations of class oppression and control created corresponding culture with corresponding ideas, beliefs, and practices. The section of society most horrifically dispossessed and subjugated by this monumental transformation to an agrarian, class-based society was women. So, what's known as the Venus statues were created from as early as 41,000 years ago, as in the image you can see, to 8,000 years ago, and as some of the earliest depictions of humans. So, yeah, here's some more examples of the Venus statues. Their purpose and meaning likely changed over millennia. However, what is clear is that women were revered, and it is very likely, based on evidence, that women's social position was at least equal to men prior to the Neolithic Revolution. Tribes globally were previously matrilineal, with women in general also likely being the main providers of sustenance, as well as having the unique ability to create life, a magical ability even today. There's substantial evidence that the role of women was originally elevated, but this drastically diminished as class society evolved, which became increasingly reflected in our art and especially religion over time. The fall of women's prominence in spiritual matters was a long-term descent. Goddesses and the temples dedicated to them were gradually replaced or destroyed as patriarchy evolved. This decline involved imposing restrictions on women's participation in religion by making sacred roles or spaces exclusively male. The spirituality and culture of humanity was increasingly transformed from being an egalitarian communal tool of expression and survival to being a tool of oppression, firmly under the control of the state and patriarchy. Ever since the developments of class society, culture has largely been the monopoly of a minority and a powerful weapon in its hands. So, how does alienation manifest today? To a capitalist, art is primarily an economic investment, a commodity, means of control, or a symbol of prestige. Art that does not meet these criteria is largely viewed as superfluous, especially if it's art that reflects working class aspirations for something more than wage slavery. Instead, according to the demands of the global free market and capitalists, we should only concern ourselves with generating profits. Why teach working class children or adults the arts or give us access when we could spend that time becoming more effective worker robots? That's our role in the economic system after all. By design, intellectual and artistic matters are often seen as alien to the working class. This attitude and outlook from the elite has in some cases become our own, with some workers sneering at those privileged enough to play instruments or create sculptures, or those in deeper, more obvious poverty. They are lazy, stupid, etc. We've heard it all before about people from council estates who have certain accents or attire. Ultimately, capitalists and their system only care about workers insofar as creating value, wage theft. This is the morality and logic of capitalism. The incentive is to pay workers just enough to ensure they return to work the next day. Beyond this, the capitalists couldn't give a shit if workers live or die, suffer or prosper, experience a dignified, humane existence, or one of drudgery and slavery. I highly recommend Sorry We Missed You by Ken Loach for a deeper artistic impression of modern alienation. Capitalists actually prefer workers with no home life, no family, friends, hobbies, or partners. They want obedient tools that prioritize work above all human social and artistic needs. Everywhere you look, the basis for culture and the arts is being eroded, attacked, and destroyed. Profit and art are incompatible, as is capitalism with a free, spiritually rich life and a healthy, vibrant existence. So, to finish with some hope of what we can look forward to if we successfully fight for socialism, here's a quote from the revolutionary playwright and actor Konstantin Stanislavski. The revolution will come from something inside. We shall see on the stage the metamorphosis of the soul of the world, the inner struggle with a worn-out past, with a new, not yet understood or realized present. This will be a struggle for equality, freedom, a new life, and a spiritual culture, the kind in which life for the good of all should no longer be the subject of idle dreams or unrealizable fantasies.